Game development is really fun, but it can be an absolute pain to get into. There are so many things you have to think about when making games, and for most people, that list is enough to put them off even starting out. But in reality, you don't need to know absolutely everything about game development from day one. A massive part of your journey is going from an idea that you have no idea how you actually make, to seeing something on the screen finally work. And in my time, I have made a ridiculous amount of projects that never really turn out as anything other than a prototype. But that's not always a bad thing. What I aim to do with each project is try to learn something new about game development in Unity, which is what I use the most, or a whole new engine altogether. So today, I'm going to go over a load of projects I've made over the years and pick out specific features that I'm proud of and what they taught me. So let's get straight into it. I've talked about the very first games I ever made in Unity before, this spaceship game in particular, so I won't spend too much time on it, but also the game has basically no content, so I can't really spend time on it anyway, but oh well. It taught me the absolute basics in game development, so it was definitely a success. I then made a few games like the original version of the Command Donuts, which is this hellish looking side scroller, and this weird attempt at a crypto mining idle game. This was still in the early days of my game development journey, so it was just covering the basics, but I was starting to learn how to control objects, make a basic UI, and play around with some physics, but nothing too crazy. My next few projects were called Dwarven Survival and Couples Goals. Dwarven Survival was sort of an FTL style base building game, where you had to move your dwarves around the place to work on different resources. And this is the first project I ever tried to tackle pathfinding of any kind. In fact, I wrote an A-star pathfinding script that works with Unity's tile map system, so I could easily draw out the maps and then the units would navigate them nicely. This was a big undertaking at the time, and figuring it out and seeing it work for the first time is exactly why I love game development. It's that journey and struggle, overcoming new obstacles to make something yourself. This game went nowhere, but the knowledge I had from making it is something I've carried on into future projects, so it's definitely worth it. Couples Goals was a 2D side-scrolling platformer with two main characters, designed for both couch co-op or a difficult single-player experience controlling both characters. I actually designed this game around myself and my wife as these two pixel art characters, and then used this project to learn some basic pixel art skills, like making my own tile map. For a first-time effort, it's not too bad and had everything I needed to make some maps, so all in all, a success. At some point around this time, I made a game called Swatch Switch, which was my first attempt to build a game for Android. It was a simple endless runner style game where you have to spin a color wheel at the bottom to match the oncoming barriers. I actually don't think it's too bad of an idea, but at this point I had no idea what I was doing when it came down to art, and it's just the basic brush in Sketchbook for everything, so it has this rounded style. I don't know, maybe it works well. I did like the faces I made for this game. These gave you some semblance of customization, and they're all based on various things, so try to guess in the comments what these characters are. The game is actually quite a challenging puzzle for your brain to try and match the colour to the barrier quickly, and all of the colour matching is just done by simple mathematics, by comparing the RGB values of your character and the barrier, and if they're within a margin of error, then you gain a point, and if not, you lose. Like I said, this is when I first published to the Play Store. My friends and family could actually play something I made for the first time. The only problem is though, I moved on from the game, and over time, the Play Store requires you to keep apps updated, which I haven't done in a while, so it means that you can't actually download this game anymore. But maybe someday I'll figure out the keys to that project and push an update. My next game was the second title I published to Android, and to be honest, I think this is one of my most complete projects to date. It's another endless runner, and this one is very simple. You play as a dwarf running down a mine shaft and have to tap to mine rocks in your way, and tap to jump over lava pits. Rocks can spawn hanging from the ceiling, so if you tap to jump and then tap again to mine, you can collect them. And this game is all about collecting as many ores as you can before you inevitably collide with something. The gameplay itself was very basic, but like I said, this is a very complete game. The game has a menu, albeit a basic one, an in-game store that uses both currency earned through runs and a one-time in-game purchase for the premium pickaxe pack. This taught me a lot about using Unity and Google Play's APIs to integrate these purchases, even if I didn't expect anyone to actually buy them. The game also includes a language setting, allowing the user to choose between English and German. I picked these two because I speak English and my wife speaks German, but the localization system I put in place can be expanded quite easily to any language. with some help from Google Translate. And it's very easy for me to add this to any future titles, which is really good because then it means I don't have to redo all of this when I need it again. It truly is the best part about making so many prototypes and half-baked games. I still have the individual pieces that I can put together later down the line to make something new. Left to Fight, a great working title, was a top-down shooter survival game that I planned to also include base management, where you go off on runs to collect resources, and then when you return home, you can upgrade your gear and build new settlements. The two biggest parts of this game that I took from were the item and inventory system. For the items, I created an extensive library of scriptable objects, Unity's data containers, to store all of the data for the weapons, resources, tools, inventories, enemies, and drop tables. And this use of scriptable objects led into the inventory system. This inventory system is a list of slots which in turn store the item and the quantity. These items also exist on the floor as an item frame, which is just the physical version of the item that the player can pick up. This whole item system was a hefty learning experience, but I then reused a lot of it in later projects, so all of the time committed wasn't a complete waste. At some point, I entered one of Bracky's game jams and made a simple puzzle game called SPSH, or Square Peg, Square Hole, in which the player had to drag items to their correct place in the scene. The theme was, you ever feel like something is missing? Well, that's because it is. And so, I thought this game was a good fit for the theme. This game was far from perfect, but people seemed to like it, and actually rated it quite nicely. For my first ever game jam, it ranked way higher than I thought it would, being just about mid-table out of almost 700 entries. This game doesn't last too long, but has a strong art style, easy to understand mechanics explained by the menu, and was the first time I ever used Unity's animation timelines to create cutscenes, so even in only 48 hours of working on it, I was still able to learn something new. And then, I started making game development videos on YouTube and started the Command Donuts. I've talked about this project a lot, but it was my most ambitious attempt of actually creating a game, and it has quite a lot of content for a prototype, and a lot of what I have covered in this video actually ended up in that game. It's just at a certain point, I lost motivation in the project, I lost any direction, and instead wanted to move forward with new projects like the ones I've made for videos. But what's important is that I used this project to improve on all of the aspects I learned over the years, as well as used it to learn how to make a YouTube video. I look back on those old videos and just think they're awful, but I can see how I've improved since then, which is really a nice thing. I try not to judge my past self too much when it comes to things like this, because if I never made those games or videos, I wouldn't have the skills I do today. Getting into the recent projects now, one small project I started was Chunk Grinder, a Voxel style resource gathering game with these funky looking dwarves. I really like this one, the way I set out the job system and created these models in a new style that I'd never done before. It gave me a lot of new experience, and it was really my first ever attempt at using shader graph, where I made a simple color swapping shader to create a variety of objects all with the same model. I think this project looks the best, and with some more content and a bit of a visual upgrade, could become something in the future. We'll just have to wait and see. Another one to go over quickly is Feelin' Lucky. I covered this game in 2 different videos, with the second one being my most recent upload, where I revived the project, tidied it up a bit, only to then put it down again. It was yet another random spark I had, where the idea seemed more fun than the project, but I took the time to learn more about camera controls, with the use of volumes to give effects to different cameras, as well as the use of dollies and transitions to make everything seem more premium. And to be honest, it worked. I'm really happy with the camera work in this game. Everything looks good, it flows nicely, and wouldn't look too out of place in an actual release. And then finally, Zcab. This was a game that I tried to make in a single day after watching Twisted Metal, where you play as a taxi driver in the apocalypse, except this one is set in a zombie infested world. I covered all of this in a video, so if you're interested in hearing more about it, I'll leave a link to that one, but the main takeaway from this game was using tile map rule tiles. I had never touched these before, but they allow you to create dynamically changing tiles based on their surroundings, and I used it to easily draw out a road around the map. Setting each road piece to their own rules, I created the city's roads and can edit them as I like. The visuals were nothing special, but the idea behind it was, and I've already started to use these more in another project, so it was definitely a good thing to learn about. And that is where I'm going to wrap up this trip down memory lane. It's understandable if you want to create your dream game from the get-go, but I would definitely recommend building smaller throwaways that are used to learn specific tools or systems, so that you're then ready for that big project. But anyway, that's enough from me. Let me know down below in the comments which of these projects you like the most, or just a project that you're proud of yourself. I'd love to read about those. Leave a like on this video, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.